Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, your number one source for income-oriented investing. And today we're going to talk about Bitcoin. I'm filming this on July 17th. Bitcoin is hitting fresh records, just like the stock market, and it's getting more and more popular, more and more adopted as well. So I'm going to tell you what I feel is the Bitcoin TRIFORCE for us income investors. If you're an income-oriented investor like me, you invest on the stock market, you're not really into buying Bitcoin on an exchange with a wallet, and you're income oriented, you're a covered call income investor, well, let's go through what I feel is really the Bitcoin TRIFORCE. 3 exposures to Bitcoin. This is going to cover the Canadian stock market, by the way, and another episode is going to cover the American stock market in case you're American and only invest on the American stock market. And by the way, TRIFORCE, yes, I know that's from The Legend of Zelda. I was obsessed with it when I was a child. Okay, I'm a millennial, so I watched The Legend of Zelda. I spent maybe hundreds of hours playing Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, driving myself crazy, finding all those little spiders, all those hearts, riding the horse through the field. Anyway, moving on, I digress. Back to Bitcoin, back to Bitcoin, right? So, okay, so how do us income investors get access to Bitcoin exposure? What are the 3 parts? Well, in my opinion, obviously, let's start with the easiest part, Bitcoin itself, right? Physical Bitcoin, kind of like investing in gold, digital gold. So this is actually, how could you invest just in the Bitcoin, nothing else? That's part 1 of the TRIFORCE. Of course, the easiest way, the most common way is the IBIT ETF, which by the way exists in Canada. There's an IBIT, same stock symbols from BlackRock, just to buy Bitcoin. This is pretty like buying digital gold. You're just buying the GLD ETF, okay? So, but of course we're income oriented. What if you want Bitcoin with income, with covered calls? Well, there's several options. The first one that came out was Purpose BTCY. They have BTCY, which is hedged to the Canadian dollar, BTCY.B, not hedged to the Canadian dollar, and they even have BTCY.U. And all they really do is hold or write covered calls on their own Bitcoin ETF, BTCC. But the reason why I feel this one is kind of out of date and obsolete now is because of the management fee. So the covered call one has 1.1% management fee, whereas there's 2 other Bitcoin covered call ETFs that have come out, actually 3 more on the Canadian stock market, which have much lower fee. But I still gotta give out a shout out to Purpose because they're the first one that came out with this concept. So right now you're looking at an approximate yield of 10.4%. And again, BTCY, several stock symbols. You could check it out here. Hedge the Canadian dollar, not hedge the Canadian dollar in USD, but they're writing basically covered calls on the Purpose Bitcoin, which is just physical Bitcoin, BTCC, which still has 3.4 billion of assets, which is very surprising. I would have thought everyone would have went to IBIT. Just like in the US, Grayscale, everyone left and went to IBIT. But I guess good for Purpose. They still kept it. But obviously, you go to IBIT, you have a much lower management fee than one, right? So moving on, the next Bitcoin. This is pure physical Bitcoin covered call ETFs. You have BCCC. They also have BCCC.U, by the way. All they do is write covered calls on IBIT. That's all they do. They hold IBIT. They write covered calls on it. What's cool about this one from Global X Canada is that they have semi-monthly distributions. You're getting 2 distributions a month or 24 distributions a year instead of monthly. Some people really like that. It's pretty cool. They've been 14 cents. So what is the current yield on this one? Well, let's do it together. 14 cents times 24, not 12, will give you the annual dividend rate, current distribution rate, which of course could change. Divide that by the current price of $23.50 times 100. You're looking at about 14% yield. So, and by the way, what is the management fee? 65 basis points. So higher yield, higher distribution frequency, and lower management fee than BTCY. Now we're gonna get into the covered call with 25% leverage. You guys know that that's my preferred way, right? Covered calls and a little bit of leverage to help mitigate the performance gap that putting covered calls on something always gives you, right? When you're putting covered calls on something that grows over time, you're going to underperform. just holding the underlying, in this case, just holding an IBIT. So adding 25% leverage helps mitigate a little bit or most of that performance gap. So BCCL, exact same thing as BCCC, guys, except there's 25% leverage. That's it. So higher yield, higher volatility, higher risk, higher management fee as well, 85 basis points. The MER is not out yet, but the MER is going to be over 2% because it will include leverage cost. They're actually borrowing money here for that 25%. So this one, the distribution rate is 17.5 cents. So if you do 17.5 times 24 divided by 24.45, you're looking at 17% yield, right? Obviously, it's going to have a little bit more yield than the non-leveraged one because there's leverage and there should be more yield. Next and last one, when it comes to just Bitcoin, this is just part one of the TRIFORCE still, the Harvest Bitcoin Enhanced Income ETF. Same exact thing as BCCL. It's going to hold IBIT, and they do covered calls on IBIT. That's it. The major difference, the management fee is less. It's 65 basis points instead of 85 basis points. This is the one I personally hold, okay? Just disclosure, this is the one I personally hold. And by the way, this is not financial advice. I'm not a registered financial advisor. It's for educational purposes only. Just want to make that crystal clear. I'm just trying to show you and teach you about these Bitcoin ETFs and how they work and the fees and whatever, et cetera, et cetera. So this one right now has a monthly distribution of 24 cents. So if you times 12 and divided by the current price of about 14.74, that's probably yesterday's, you're looking at about 19.5% yield on this one right now. So that is part one of the TRIFORCE, just owning the Bitcoin. Part two is owning Bitcoin related companies and miners. So, like gold, there's gold, you could buy gold, and then you could buy gold miners. Well, that's how I kind of see this next ETF, which is pretty much only one of its kind in Canada. This ETF, HBTE, is the second part of the TRIFORCE where you're actually investing in Bitcoin. They call it Bitcoin leaders, but it's Bitcoin companies in the Bitcoin ecosystem with enhanced monthly cash flow. So this one also has cover calls. This one also has 25% leverage. Management fees a little bit higher than the 65 basis points. It's 75 basis points. What does it hold? About 15 companies related to Bitcoin. And obviously, Coinbase is at the top here. You have Galaxy, Core Scientific, crypto, digital asset services, crypto miners. Of course, you have MicroStrategy, the biggest Bitcoin treasury company in the world, right? Strategy. You'll have Block, Marathon, Riot, other big miners, a couple of other smaller miners as well. And you also literally have IBIT itself. You have an approximate 10% in Bitcoin itself here, physical Bitcoin. Here's the breakdown. You can see the breakdown here. So this is another part of the TRIFORCE, which I feel is a nice complement to just owning the Bitcoin. So if we're comparing it to gold, HBT is kind of like getting the gold miners versus getting the gold. The last part of the TRIFORCE, and by the way, they also have, if you're in, for some reason you want growth, you're not looking for a covered call one. They have HBLK, Harvest does, where it's companies that are within the crypto or blockchain technology eco space. And if you look at the portfolio, it actually has a lot of the same stocks as it has a lot of the same stocks as HBTE, but there's no covered calls here. Just wanted to point that out. Last but not least, my personal favorite part of the Bitcoin TRIFORCE is strategy stock. I'm a huge fan of Michael Saylor. He's listening to his podcasts, many of them, he's all over the internet, has gotten me more and more bullish on Bitcoin. So investing in strategy is a leveraged way to get exposure to Bitcoin. So just very briefly, I'm not an expert on this. Strategy, or the stock MSTR, is basically issuing preferred stock, raising as much debt, as much fiat money, as much money as possible to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. Right now, they have over 600,000 Bitcoin. Michael Saylor has said they will never sell their Bitcoin. I highly recommend you watch Michael Saylor's podcast. My personal favorite one is on PBD. He's been on the PBD podcast. He's been on there a few times. The latest one is absolutely amazing. I even have a video called Michael Saylor Mentions Misty. That video has been, in 5 years, one of my top 3 most viewed videos and still going crazy to this day. So you could watch that. You could search my channel for MSTY. But basically, strategy is raising preferred stock, raising debt. They have Stride, Strike, Strife. They're just creating debt, basically preferred shares, to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. So basically, MSTR, investing in MSTR stock, is like investing in a leveraged Bitcoin exposure. On a podcast, he basically said buying MSTR is like 1.5x to 2x leverage on Bitcoin. So this is the third part of the TRIFORCE. I would say probably the riskiest out of the 3, but definitely the one with the highest volatility and reward, because MSTR, because of what he's doing, is a very, very, very volatile stock. You can see the volatility here, 57%, which means when you're doing covered calls on something that's very volatile, you take in a lot of call premiums, a lot of premiums, right? So hence the most popular, biggest one, Misty from YieldMax. This is on the US stock market. It has almost 6 billion in assets. It writes covered calls on Misty. It gives up a lot of upside on it writes covered calls on MSTR. It gives up a lot of upside, but that's why the yield is very, very high, because they're writing a lot of covered calls, and it has monthly distributions, which vary. But the yield could be anywhere from 50% to 100%. Obviously, if volatility starts going down, like Michael Saylor is predicting, the distribution rate is going to go down. But in Canada, there's 2 options which I feel are much, much superior than Misty. Maybe not in terms of yield, but in terms of total return and strategy. Because again, guys, just like I talked about in the QYLD video, XYLD video recently, hopefully that one will come out before this one comes out. If you're doing too much covered calls on something you expect to grow over time, you're going to miss out. You're going to underperform a lot. So Harvest, the same guys who do HBIX, HBLK, and HBTE, have come out with a same stock symbol, Misty. So they're just writing covered calls on MSTR stock. The yield is much lower. It's about 30% yield. But Harvest is only writing covered calls on max 33 to 50% of the portfolio. And I've spoken to the Michael Kovacs many times. They're more comfortable at the 33%. So they're only doing covered calls on 33% of the portfolio approximately, which means you're capturing a lot more upside if strategy grows, which will grow with Bitcoin at a leverage rate. So this is far superior, if you ask me, total return wise, than Misty. And by the way, the management fee is a lot lower. It's 40 basis points, whereas the YieldMax one is 99 basis points. Well, that's the MER. The MER is probably going to be around a little bit higher than that. But my personal favorite one here is not Misty. It's not this Misty. It's not this Misty. It's MSTE. This is the Harvest MicroStrategy Enhanced High Income Shares ETF. So it's basically MSTY from Harvest with 25% leverage. That's what it is. You guys know I'm a fan of covered calls and 25% leverage. So this is the one I personally own. So I own in my personal portfolio, MSTE, HBTE, and HBIX, all from Harvest, all with covered calls and 25% leverage. That makes up my Bitcoin TRIFORCE. So my personal opinion, this is the one that's the most superior. In terms of strategy. Again, you're not going to get as much yield as Misty, of course, but they're doing covered calls on max 50%, but typically 33%. So this has about 30% yield. This has about 37% yield, which is very high, but obviously it's going to be much less than Misty, who has 70 plus, because they're covering 100% of the portfolio. And I talked about it to death in this video, guys, because some people still have the Misty YieldMax. And I strongly feel you should, if you're Canadian in a TFSA or cash account especially, you should go with MSTE instead. I proved my point, I think, beyond a reasonable doubt in this video, make sure to check it out. But the proof is in the pudding, because if you're doing too much covered calls and the strategy stock price goes up a lot, well, these ones will do much better than MSTY because they're doing less covered calls, right? If you look at the past month on the YieldMax MSTY, it went up 9.78%. If you look at the Harvest MSTY without the leverage, it went up 13.5%. If you look at MSTE with the covered calls and the 25% leverage, it went up 17.96%. So you really see the difference when you're writing too much covered calls. Yes, you're getting a nice income, but you're capping your upside a lot, especially if the asset, in this case, MSTR, goes up and has done really, really well. You see that MSTR has gone up about 21% the past month, and MSTE is pretty much there. So this goes back to what I've been saying, where covered calls and 25% leverage, at 25% leverage really helps to give you similar performance to the underlying, in this case, MSTR. So stay tuned for the American episode. I'm going to film it right now. So if you're American, or you invest in, as a Canadian, you invest in US listed equities, you have Misty. If you have Misty in your RSP or Lira, many of you have. There's actually many strategy covered call ETFs now in the US. There's actually much more than in Canada. In Canada, there's only one. There's only the Harvest ones. There's a lot of them. I came out with a video on it, but we'll do the Bitcoin TRIFORCE on the US market as well. Give me a thumbs up, guys. Hit that like button. I would really appreciate it. It really helps. And again, I really feel strongly personally about Bitcoin. That's just my personal opinion. I'm not a financial advisor, and I think that you should consider adding some to your portfolio. And I just presented to you 3 different ways of doing that. I called it the TRIFORCE. Maybe you like 1 out of the 3 or 2 out of the 3. Either way, it's up to you to decide what you want to invest in. So hope this video was informative for you. See you next time.